Okay, so at this point, the only thing we've done with quadratic equations was to factor them. If they could be factored, so we solved by factoring, and then we also solved by using the square root property if they were in that form. But notice that not all quadratic equations are factorable. So you're going to need another method to do that. And there are two methods that you can use when you have a quadratic equation that cannot be solved by factoring. And that's completing the square and the quadratic formula. Now, completing the square is a lengthy process. Notice right here. So there are 4 steps that you need to be able to do in order to use completing the square. Now, the quadratic formula, remember the quadratic formula, negative b plus or minus the square root, that idea? To derive it, last semester when you used it, you were just told what it was. You had no idea where that thing came from, right? You had no idea. Well, it comes from the idea of completing the square. Now, we're not going to do that in class. I think I have in one of the videos. I'm not going to ask you to regurgitate that on a test. But if you wanted to see where the quadratic formula came from, there's a video on there about completing the square. All right. But if you were to derive it, if you really wanted to know where it came from, it does involve completing the square. But here's the idea of completing the square. You're given the general form of quadratic equation. Remember, it's ax squared plus bx plus c equals 0. Remember that? At some point, when you're completing the square, at some point, you're going to end up, and you're going to see when we do the steps, you're going to end up with an expression squared equal a number. That's what you're going to end up with. All right, well, if I end up with that, then what do you think the next step is? Square root property. And so notice the last step of completing the square is to do what? Square root property. Okay? All right. Now, for us right now, you see that step 1? You see that step 1? You have to make sure that the coefficient of x is what? 1. If it's not, you're going to have to divide both sides by that number. But for right now, the ones that we're going to do right now, they'll be 1. So kind of step 1 you don't have to do. But I will give you one problem on a worksheet. I don't think it's for this one right now, but maybe next week, once you practice with this, I'll give you a problem on a worksheet where the coefficient is 1. Just see what you can do with it. But in the test, it will be a 1. Actually, I did say on a test, I'm not going to ask you to do one completing the square. It'll just be a worksheet. Okay, so let's do this example. It's not that difficult. All right, so let's do this example. Number 1. So we're going to solve this by completing a square. Number 1. Huh? Let's see. Okay, so solve by completing a square. Solve by completing a square. All right, x squared plus 6x plus 5 equal 0. So again, what kind of equation is this? Quadratic. Now, this equation is factorable. You can look at this and tell me what the two factors are. 5 and 1. So, well, but the factors would be x plus 5 times x plus 1. But the direction says not to do it by factoring. The direction says solve by what? By completing a square. So I gave you a simple example first, so you know that at the end, you better have what solutions? X plus 6 equals 0 would be what?
X plus 5, x plus 1.
Oh, 5, right? X 5 and 1. So x plus 5 equals 0, you get x to be negative 5 as a solution, and there would be a negative 1. So hopefully we'll get that. Okay, step 1. Is leading coefficient 1? The leading coefficient means the coefficient of x squared. Is the coefficient of x squared 1? Yes. All right, so that's step 1. Step 2. Step 2. Isolate the variable terms on one side, bring the constant on the other. So which one is your constant? 5. So you got to bring that on the other side. So how will I rewrite the next step?
X squared plus 6x.
Leave some space here. Leave some space. And then say equal what?
Negative 5.
-5. All right, so leave some space between the variable term and the equal sign. All right, so that was your step 2. Okay, step 3. Step 3 says this. Now we're going to use the idea of completing a square. So part A says add the square of half the coefficient of x. All right, so this is what you're going to do. What's the coefficient of x? 6. All right, so I'm going to write it down.
Oh, that's
6. That part A says I take half of it, meaning I divide by what? 2. And then I do what to it? It says square, right? Agree? So I take, remember part A, I take the coefficient of x, which is what? 6. It says take half. Take half means divide by what? 2. And then I do what to that number? Square it. All right, now this is a good number because 6 divided by 2 is easily what number? 3. And what's 3 squared? 9. So that is 9. So part A is what number? 9. So once you bring the constant to the other side, I do what's that coefficient of x? Divide by 2, and then do what to it? Square it. Okay? That's all it said. All right. And then I do what to both sides? To this number. Add that number to both sides. All right, so you remember that little space I had right here? Okay, so x squared plus 6x equal 5. Now you're going to add what to both sides? 9. Oh, -5, yes, thank you. All right, so x squared plus 6x plus the 9 equals -5 plus 9. Remember, what you do one side, you have to do to the other. Now, that left side, if you factor, will be a perfect square trinomial. And I remind you what a perfect square trinomial is. A perfect square trinomial is a trinomial that can be written as a binomial squared. A perfect square trinomial is a trinomial that can be written as a binomial squared. So listen carefully. See that x squared plus 6x plus 9? If you factor this in your mind, you would say x plus what? 3 times x plus what? 3. So that's really x plus 3 squared. Equal what?
-5 plus 9.
Which is 4. So that's where I'm at. -5 plus 9 is 4. So it is always going to be a perfect square trinomial. So when you factor, that binomials will be the same. Because remember, when we started talking about completing a square, we said at some point you better get an expression what? Squared equal to a number. Now the perfect square trinomial, the idea is the same as perfect squares. Remember yesterday we talked about perfect squares? Like 16 is a perfect square? Because I can write 16 as what number squared? 4. So 4 squared. 25 is a perfect square, so I can write it as 5 what? Squared. x squared plus 6x plus 9 is a perfect square trinomial because I can write it as what expression squared?
X plus 3.
X plus 3. So there's a relationship between the idea of perfect squares. Perfect square numbers versus perfect square trinomials. All right, so it's always going to end up like this. If you're doing it correctly, it will always end up like that. Now the next step is to do what? Square root property. So it's what we did yesterday and the beginning today. And then you're done. All right, so let's rewrite this over. So I'm going to take the square root of both sides. I must insert what?
Plus or minus.
Plus or minus. The square and the square root undo each other. So what's the expression on the left?
X plus 3 equals plus or minus 4.
2. Okay. Now notice I'm going to end up with what kind of solutions? Rational. Because I no longer have a square root there. So since it's going to be rational, I want you to split it apart. So you can write this as two linear equations. X plus 3 equals what? 2. And the other one's x plus 3 equals a what? Negative 2. And so notice I went from a quadratic equation to two linear. So I'm going to subtract 3 from both sides. So what's one of my solutions? Negative 1. That's what we said, right? Over here, if I subtract 3 from both sides, I get x to be what? Negative 5. And that was the other one. So completing the square. Now the easiest trinomials to solve by completing the square is if the coefficient of x is an even number. So you see this is an even number right here? I made it an even number because that's the easiest to do first. Because when I divide by 2, it's always still going to be a whole number, right? 6 divided by 2 is what? 3, a whole number. 8 divided by 2 is what? 4, a whole number. Negative 4 divided by 2 is negative 2. It's not a whole number, it's an integer though. Notice I didn't say whole number because what are your whole numbers? 0, 1, 2, 3. Positive numbers and 0. Negative 4 would not be a whole number. It would be an integer though. All right, so let's do another one. We're going to do another one where the coefficient of x is even to make this process right here easy for you for right now. All right, number 2. Write this down. You're going to follow the steps. Okay, x squared minus 8x plus 15 equal 0. X squared minus 8x plus 15 equals 0. Direction says solve by completing the square. All right? Step 1's already taken care of, right? Yes or no?
Yes.
Yes, because what was step 1? Step 1 said you have to make sure that x squared has what coefficient? 1. The leading coefficient is 1. Leave it. So what we're going to do today, the leading coefficient will be 1. Next week, we'll do one where it's not, just show you what you would have to do. What's the next step? What's the next step? Move 15 over. You got to get the variables on one side, the constants to the other, and leave some space. So x squared minus 8x equals a what? Negative 15. Make sure when you rewrite it, it's negative 15. Okay. Now, the next step says to do what? The next step has 2 parts. All right. Divide what by 2?
The 8.
Okay. Now, some of you said 8. It's not 8. It's negative 8.
Oh, okay.
Okay. So the coefficient of x is negative 8. All right. So listen carefully. The coefficient of x is negative 8, right? I take half of that, which means divide by what? 2. And whatever that is, I'm going to do what to it? Square it. All right, so let's talk about that part. Negative 8 divided by 2, I can simplify. Go ahead and do it. What is it? Negative 4. When I square it, what do I get? Positive 16. All right, so that's where I'm at. Okay? Now, still that part A, what do I do to 16? Add it to both sides. So I'm going to say plus 16, plus 16. So what I did, what you do one side, you do the other. So notice I left some space there to add that 16. The left-hand side is now what kind of trinomial? Was the word? Perfect square. That means that when you factor the left-hand side, it's going to be a binomial raised to the second power. So what do you think? Huh? X minus 4 squared. All right, so listen to this right here now. See that at x minus 4? That's that minus 4 right here. So always know that whatever this is, you better have this right here. So if this was, let's say, negative 9, then this is going to be x what? Minus 9. If this was positive 15, then this is going to be x what? Plus 15 squared. Okay? So always use this to help you. And make sure you check. X minus 4 times x minus 4. X minus 4 times x minus 4. Make sure you understand that that is correct. Because when I follow this, what's x times x? X squared. So that's just right here. What's the outer? What's the inner? When I add them up, what do I get? And that's what I wanted. And then what's the negative 4 times the negative 4? Positive 16. Okay? So always know that whatever that number is right here, before you square it, that's going to be inside that parenthesis. So if you go back to the one we just did, see that number 3? Positive 3, right? This was x plus what? 3. Okay? So use that as a guide. All right, so x minus 4 equals what? 1. All right, so that's where I'm at. Now remember, the whole point of completing a square is so that at the end you can use what property? Square root
So
property.
x minus 4 squared equals 1, right?
Yes, that's what I have.
Where you inadvertently left the square out. You just said it. That's what I'm reading.
I'm sorry, say it again?
Whenever you just said a second ago, you inadvertently left the square out. Word square.
Oh, okay, so what I just said, x minus 4 equals 1? Is that what it said?
Yeah.
Okay. All right, so x minus 4 squared equal 1. What's the next step? Square root both sides. I must insert what? Plus or minus. So the square and square root into each other. So what's the expression on the left?
4
Equal
plus or minus
1, right? Square root of 1 is 1. 1's a perfect square. Am I going to get rational or irrational solutions? Rational. So split it apart. Tell me what those rational solutions are. So x minus 4 equals 1
x minus 4
equals negative 1. So notice I have these two linear equations. I'm going to add 4 to both sides. So x equals what? That's one of your solutions. Over here, add 4 to both sides. X equal what? 3. Those are your two solutions. All right, number 3. Number 3. Suppose you had x squared plus 4x minus 7 equal 0. X squared plus 4x minus 7 equals 0. Step 1's already done. Leading coefficient is 1. What's the next step?
Move 7.
Add 7 to both sides. So move 7 over. Leave some space. X squared plus 4x space equal 7. All right, what's the next step? I take the coefficient of x, which is what?
4
Positive 4, and divide by 2, and whatever that is, I'm going to do what to it? Square it. So 4 divided by 2 is what? Positive 2. I'm going to square it, and what do I get? 4. And what do I do that for? Add it to both sides. So plus 4, plus 4. The left-hand side is now a perfect square trinomial. So that's when you factor it, it's going to be a binomial squared. What is that binomial? X plus what? 2. X plus 2. Because x plus 2 times x plus 2 is going to be x squared plus 4x plus 4. So remember we said that whatever that number is what this is going to be. And what does that equal? 11. Equals 11. Now, the next step is what you did yesterday and beginning today. What's the next step? Square root property. And so the plus and minus, and yes, it will be irrational now. So there are a couple of different ways you can write the answer if you want to. But the expression on the left is going to be what? Equal plus or minus square root of 11. So if you want to write it in a compact form, then just bring the 2 over and you're done. So you would subtract 2 from both sides. Remember that your solution is irrational. Irrational. And so you get x to be what? Yep. All right. Now in my math lab, you would have to separate it as negative 2 plus the square root of 11, comma, and then negative 2 minus square root of 11. Okay? Now, remember when we did the previous 2 problems, we ended up with rational solutions? Rational solutions? So since we ended up with our solution, remember I told you to split it apart? You could have done the same thing here. It does not matter. They're just irrational. So this right here, I could have done this. X plus 2 equal square root of 11, and what's the other? Negative square root of 11, right? And then subtract 2. Now when I subtract 2, right here, when I'm going to go back to this page, right here, I can combine 2 and a negative 3, and I got what? Negative 1. I can combine negative 2 and negative 3, and I got what? Negative 5. Can I combine the square root of 11 and a negative 2? No. You can just, all you can do is just rewrite it as negative 2 plus square root of 11. And over here, subtract 2, that will be x equal what? Negative 2 minus the square root of 11. Okay? All right. Now let's look at number 4. Number 4. Number 4, we have x squared plus 12x minus 54 equal 0. Now before we go 1, notice that the x terms, the coefficient, was what kind of number? No, the x term. Even or odd? Even. Okay? I made them even because even numbers are divisible by what? 2. If it was odd, you would end up with a fraction. And we haven't done one like that yet. We'll do one. We'll do one Monday. All right, what's the next step? So you get x squared plus 12x, leave some space, equal what? Positive 54. All right, you got to be careful. You put negative 54 versus positive 54. Those are 2 different things. All right, what's the next step? Divide what by 2? 12. So 12 divided by 2. Once I do that, what do I do to that number? Square it. Now let's simplify 12 halves. That's just what? 6. And what's 6 squared? 36. So what does that 36, what do I need to do to that 36? Add to both sides. So plus 36, plus 36. The left-hand side is what kind of trinomial now? Perfect square. So if you factor it, it's going to be a binomial squared. Okay, tell me what that binomial will be. X plus 6. Because x plus 6 times x plus 6, when you FOIL it, is going to be this trinomial. And then on the right side, what's 54 and 36? 90? All right, so that's where I'm at. All right, now what's the next step? Square root property. Square root, I have to insert a plus or minus. Now the square root of 90. 9 times 10. Remember, you can simplify the square root of 90. What the largest perfect square that goes into 90 is 9. So let's go off to the side and kind of figure out what that is. So that's square root of 9 times 10, right? Make sure when you write like this, you always use a perfect square. So don't say 3 times 30. That's not going to help you. 3 times 30 is 90, but is 3 or 30 a perfect square? No. The idea is to use a perfect square and use the largest. So 9 is a perfect square, right? That means the square root of 9 is going to be what? 3. So this is going to be 3 square root of 10. So that's what this is going to become. So when I take the square root of both sides, the expression on the left is what? X plus 6. The expression on the right is going to be plus or minus 3 square root of 10. Now, are my solutions going to be rational or irrational? Irrational. So all you do is bring this 6 over, you're done. So what does x equal?
6 plus.
Nope. Negative 6 plus or minus 3 square root of 10. You mess that up, you can be very upset with yourself. Now, if you want to, how many solutions are there though? When I write this, it's really saying there how many solutions? 2. So if you want, you can write it as negative 6 plus 3 square root of 10. And what's the other? Minus 3 square root of 10. Okay. All right. And then one more, number 5. X squared minus 10x plus 29 equal 0. X squared minus 10x plus 29 equal 0. Again, notice the coefficient of x is an integer, and that integer is you'll see the 10 there, and it's even. That's the first step.
Number 29.
Bring the 29 over. So I'm going to get x squared minus 10x, leave some space, equal what? Negative 29. All right, divide what by 2?
Negative 10 by
Negative 10. So I take negative 10, I take half of it, and once I do that, I'm going to do what to it? Square it. Now, what's negative 10 halves?
negative 5.
Notice I put that in parentheses.
Squared.
Squared equal what? Positive 25. Once I get that number, what do I do with it?
Add both sides.
Add to both sides. Okay. So now the trinomial on the left is what kind of trinomial now? Perfect square trinomial. It's a perfect square trinomial because I can write it as a binomial square. That's what makes it a perfect square trinomial. X minus 5, good. Not x plus 5, because if you make that mistake, and some of you will, if you make that mistake and you say x plus 5 and you check it, you know that cannot be right. Because what's the outer? 5x. What's the inner? When I add them up, what do I get? 10x. What do I want? Negative 10x. So it cannot be x plus 5. It has to be what? X minus 5. So that's why you really need to look at this right here to help you. So x minus 5 squared equal negative 4. Now be careful, that's not irrational. And it's not rational either. Now when we did the first, what number is that? 5? When we did the first 4, that number on the outside always ended up being positive, right? So if it was positive, then we just talked about rational versus irrational. But the number on the outside now is what? Negative. It's going to be what kind of number? Imaginary. Okay. All right, but you do the same thing. I'm gonna have to rewrite this here. Okay, what do I do both sides? Square root, plus or minus. Okay, what expression is left on the left? All right, what is the expression on the right? Plus or minus? Very good. And all you do now is just, and you're done. It's just like you did with this. So x equal 5 plus or minus 2i. There's your answer. Now, if you want, you can write it as two separate solutions. What are they? 5 plus 2i, and the other one is 5 minus 2i. Okay? Not that bad. Now, Monday, we're going to do one where the leading coefficient, I'm sorry, not leading, the coefficient of x is not even. So you can see what that's going to look like. Then we're also going to do one where the leading coefficient is not 1. Just to show you what's to be.
But neither of those will be on test.
Well, I'm not going to ask you anything with completing the square in the test. All right. But on the worksheets I've given you, so the worksheets I'll give you with this, at this point, the leading coefficient is not 1. But I have to give you one where it is, the leading coefficient is 1. I'm going to have to give you one where it is not 1, just to show you what to do.
The uneven, the odd?
You do that as well. Okay?